is Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
Tonight, a weak jobs report, a market sell-off, the Bureau of Labor Statistics Commissioner set to be fired, and a Fed Governor, Kugler, resigns. The developing news as we come on the air tonight, Fed Governor Adriana Kugler resigning effective 1 week from now. The move coming just 48 hours after the FOMC's decision not to cut interest rates.
And news also coming after the latest jobs report shows signs of a softening labor market for 3 consecutive months. The stock slide on the back of the payroll numbers and the surprise move from the president, vowing to fire the Bureau of Labor Statistics chief, and alleging without evidence that the figures were politically manipulated.
Joining us to respond to it all, Peter Navarro, senior counselor to the president and director of the Office of Trade and Manufacturing Policy at the White House. And we'll hear from Democratic Senator Mark Warner, member of the Senate Banking Committee, just ahead.
Plus, 4 months after the president unveiled his Liberation Day tariffs, his latest revisions deliver an economic shockwave with some of the steepest U.S. import duties in almost 100 years. We'll cover every angle from Washington to New York.
And the president orders 2 U.S. nuclear submarines redeployed in response to threats from former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. What the escalation means as the clock ticks down to the president's deadline for a Russia-Ukraine truce. But we begin tonight with that developing news. Fed Governor Adriana Kugler's announcement that she will step down from her position on the central bank's board effective August 8th. And joining us now with the details is Bloomberg's Michael Mckee, live from World Headquarters in New York. So, Mike, a surprise move. Her term, of course, was not set to end yet. What happens next?
Well, that's a very good question. Her term was to last through January of 2026. It would be the first opening that President Trump has to fill. We don't know exactly why she left. She did not vote at this week's Fed meeting because of a personal matter, according to the Fed. And so we assume this resignation's related to that. But it does leave a seat open immediately that the president could fill. Now, the political angle to this is that the only other seat that would come up basically during Trump's term is if Jay Powell, when his term as chair is up in May, were to resign his seat as governor. He could stay on as a governor until 2028. So the president has to decide whether to fill this seat with somebody that he thinks should be the next chair and sort of create a situation where you've got this chair in waiting or a shadow Fed chair until Powell's term is over, or take a chance that Powell is going to resign. The other option would be to make Chris Waller, who is considered a candidate and already a governor, make him the chair designate, and then he could put anybody he wants into Kugler's seat. So it creates an interesting situation for the administration now.
So the Scott Bessent plan is coming together then, right, Michael? We talked to the Treasury Secretary before the inauguration, and he talked about this. This was during the campaign even, when he floated the idea of a shadow Fed chair. It looks like we might get one then.
Well, you know, to be fair to Scott Bessent, he has also backed off from that idea because I think people on Wall Street have convinced him that listening to 2 people telling you what the Fed is going to do is going to be very difficult for the folks on Wall Street, and they would prefer that not happen. And I presume that if a Chris Waller were named, he would refrain from speaking about what the Fed is going to do. It's hard to know what any of the other candidates were going to do. But in terms of Bessent's plans, too, the administration had hoped to appoint somebody at least to Kugler's seat and probably name a chairman by maybe late October, November, giving the Senate time to confirm somebody. This could speed up the whole process. So there's a lot for the administration to think about now.
Great to get the view of Michael Mckee on this breaking story. Many thanks, Michael. Joining us now live for fresh reaction to all of the news coming out of the White House, and there's been plenty this afternoon and this evening. Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia serves on the Senate Banking and Finance Committee. Senator, welcome. It's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. I know you were just listening to our conversation with Michael Mckee, and just off the bat, what's your reaction to Governor Kugler's decision here, and how concerned are you about who might replace her?
I've just seen the headlines, so I am learning information real time, whether this was a personal choice, whether there was a feeling of political pressure, and I'm almost hesitant to even weigh in because I don't have the information. Anything though that just as a overarching point, anything that makes this Fed more political, that robs of its independence is not good for America. It's not good for the world markets. I've been candidly proud of so many of my Republican senators who, while they seem unwilling to bend the knee to President Trump on most items, at least on the Fed independence, that has been rock solid. And even to give credit to some of my more progressive Democratic colleagues who, when it comes to the Fed independence, have been solid as well. So on this in particular member of the board, I got to do a little more due diligence before I weigh in.
Well, so, Senator, are you saying it's not necessarily a guarantee that whoever the president might want to nominate to fill Kugler's position will be okayed by the banking committee? Are there specific candidates who you think might enter this discussion who you think even your Republican colleagues would take issue with?
Well, I don't want to, I've been amazed, particularly within the national security domain, of the number of candidates that I thought were so grossly unqualified. And I've gotten a lot of my Republican friends who will privately say, Mark, you're right. But, the bottom's been scraped already in the intel community. I don't know whether there'll be people on the Fed position. And obviously, the Fed positions last longer than a single term. And enormously powerful. So I'm not betting on whoever gets put up probably won't have a fairly decent glide path. But let me put a big but, because I think the other subject that is frankly the most concerning to me is that the commissioner at the BLS is getting fired. I mean, America's strength, this is the point I try to make everyone. America's strength is made from our economy. It's made from our strength of our military. It's made from our values, which we have been well respected. It's also made from the fact that our institutions, particularly our financial institutions, that nobody thinks you're cooking the books. A challenge that China has in terms of when they release some of their data, people question that. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is the least partisan, most respected, and the idea that somewhere out of nowhere, it appears to me, other than the fact that Donald Trump didn't like the job numbers today, this woman gets arbitrarily fired. This to me is beyond outrageous, and it might bleed into the Fed decision because, oh my gosh, if they're trying to cook the books on the actual numbers, maybe we ought to redouble our efforts to make sure Fed governors are going to be truly independent.
Well, a lot said there, Senator. Would you support an investigation into this claim to find out if these numbers are rigged?
Listen, I have huge confidence that the numbers coming out of the BLS so far under Trump, under Biden, under Trump 1, under Bush, Obama, that has been just a kind of a no-go zone. But we've seen the president have such kind of this ranting and obsession about, if people don't bend the knee, and his tendency to kind of, when facts are not convenient, to ignore them. If there was, I sure as heck would be interested in knowing more about why this commissioner was fired, and particularly if her replacement is someone that is simply a Trump loyalist. You're damn right. I think we're going to want to keep a much more careful eye. And this would be a case where, while it may not break through to the greater public, I hope the market, and I hope those around the market, and again, you guys are ground zero, I hope you raise holy hell on this. The idea that we're firing the referee, the statistician, because you don't like the results, that's how you end up with corrupt systems.
Well, Senator, if we take the results at face value and assume they have not been manipulated, they do show the weakest 3 months of jobs growth we've seen since the pandemic. Does it actually prove a point that the president has been making that the Federal Reserve might need to lower interest rates?
Well, it would make the point in my mind that, you're seeing the slowing of the growth because the concerns around inflation that families and businesses are feeling. I mean, remember, Procter & Gamble that makes basically for consumers everything, and many of those products actually made in America. They said yesterday they're going to take 25% of their products and increase the prices because of tariffs. This, I have been surprised, pleasantly surprised. I want the economy to do well. Pleasantly surprised that the effects of the tariffs haven't hit as hard as they will. I think we are, from every economist I've talked to, we expected to start to see that in the third quarter. Well, obviously we're, just at the front end of the third quarter. I don't think we will. I think these inflationary pressures driven by the chaos of the tariffs on and off, I think we're going to really see that creep in pretty dramatically. So, the Fed has got to make sure we get the economy through this soft landing. And again, I think, but for the tariffs, I think the Fed's ability to have had a soft landing, when we go back and think, a couple of years ago under Biden and inflation was running 8, 9, 10%. If anybody had said, all right, we're going to end up a couple of years later with inflation back relatively under control and record highs in the markets, I think most people would say that's a damn good outcome.
All right, Senator, we appreciate you joining us. Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, a member of the Senate Banking Committee. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And joining us now with the take from inside the administration is Peter Navarro, White House Senior Counselor for Trade and Manufacturing Policy, who's back with us in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thanks for being here, as always, on Bloomberg TV and radio. As we consider specifically this BLS issue and the contention from the president, well, I do have a question for you, sir. It is related to this.
You hit Mark Warner with exactly the right question.
Well, I'd like to ask it of you as well. We either assume that the data is manipulated, in which case I'm curious as to whether you personally have seen evidence of it. But if it is manipulated and actually we have a stronger labor market than the data suggests, why would the Fed need to cut interest rates?
Well, when you asked Mark Warner that question, what he should have said, hell yes, the Fed should have cut rates 3 months ago if we had known that that was the data and if he believes it was the data.
Do you?
I mean, you can't have it both ways. Here's what I know. That was the biggest miss in 50 years. The biggest miss. Now, it's either incompetence or partisanship. What I can tell you, Kelly, is that the BLS and the BEA have a history of political interference with their data. If you go back, there's the famous quick pay scan audit, if you remember that one in 2015, when Obama was able to move data from Q4 back to Q3, and it helped him for his election. And then in 2018, we found out that they had basically suppressed numbers on Q4 growth in 2018, basically to make us look bad on what we were doing with respect to the tax cut. So here's the thing. There's two possibilities here. Let me just say this. Since the pandemic, we've been getting the numbers spectacularly wrong. I mean, the variance in the numbers dramatically increased after COVID. So we either got incompetence or we got partisanship. And either way, it was absolutely appropriate for President Trump to clean house at the BLS. We need people to give us numbers. And the reason why it matters is if we don't get the right numbers, then we're not going to make the right decisions, particularly at the Fed. So
you've
that's
seen
what
evidence that
today.
These numbers are not right. Where is that evidence coming from?
Well, let's say they're right. Okay, let's go with that first. Okay, that's the biggest miss in 50 years. Okay, so that's incompetence. How do you miss that badly? And if they miss that badly, the implications of this are this. Suppose those numbers were right and we had known them accurately 3 months ago. Interest rates would probably be 100 basis points lower, not just 50. Okay? So there's an interaction between that data and the Fed's decision. And Warner, I mean, look, these guys do their talking points. Instead of answering your question honestly, he just shifted and supported Powell in terms of not lowering interest rates because of tariffs, when in fact, Mr. Warner, debate you anytime, sir, there's no evidence of any inflation from the tariffs. So we're in a situation now where we just need good numbers. We're not getting them. So what's wrong with firing the person who made the biggest miss in 50 years? And for the last 8 years, we've had evidence of partisanship and evidence of incompetence.
Well, to stick with the you can't have both file just for a minute, to get back to Kayleigh's original question, if the job market is in fact much stronger than the data are reflecting, then why would be cutting interest rates at this point? Wouldn't that inflame inflation on its own?
Okay, let's have that's the perfect question. Okay, because let's say the number had come in at estimate today, we would still be in a world where interest rates should be 50 to 100 basis points lower for a number of reasons. First, trend of inflation is down. Second of all, the differential between U.S. interest rates is significantly bigger than the rest of the world, and that creates all sorts of problems in terms of arbitrage and things like that. And there's no evidence of the tariff inflation that Powell is claiming is holding him back. He says, like, well, if it weren't for tariff uncertainty, I'd lower them. Well, there's no tariff uncertainty in the data. So even if, okay, so again, two cases here. One case, the numbers are right, the revisions are right. It was a horrible miss. They're incompetent. Fire them. And the Fed should have lowered interest rates by 100 basis points by now. Or the numbers are wrong and we would have hit estimate. And even in that case, we still lower interest rates by at least 50 basis points. So, I mean, the Trump economy is doing beautifully. So let's not, I mean, this is Bloomberg, right? What investors, okay, we got like 500 down on the Dow today, but it's like fine. I was like on April 2nd, we got below 40,000 on the Dow. I said, hey, it's going to 50,000, no worry. And sure enough, it came back sharply. We're in a very good place. We're in a very good place right now. But we need better data. That's the takeaway from today.
Well,
that
and he's made the point
miss
on the gap between expectations that Wall Street economists might have had and the actual data we got. But can we not attribute that gap to the very uncertainty you were just referencing? Maybe you're not seeing it necessarily in inflation, but how do we know it's not filtering into hiring and firing decisions that businesses are making?
I think there's, again, a great question, Kayleigh. I think what we've learned is there was data before the pandemic, data during and after the pandemic. And the variability of the data since the pandemic days has been much higher than before for two reasons. One is during the pandemic, we had a bunch of phantom companies, a lot of fake going on, and it's like really distortion. But the other thing that was happening is the tremendous influx of millions and millions of illegal aliens, which were creating this disconnect between the two kinds of surveys that all these numbers are based on. And the beautiful thing about those numbers, I don't know if you saw this, but on net, we've had 1.8 million jobs created for American citizens, and we've lost 1.3 million jobs for illegal aliens. So this is an important implication as you go forward. We've gotten used to needing 190,000 jobs a month in order to keep the unemployment rate at whatever it is. Once you get the illegal alien deportations going, that steady state will be dropping to 100,000 a month. So you're going to be sitting on the set here and you say, well, it's only 100,000. And it's no, that's all we need when you get rid of the illegal aliens taking Americans' jobs. And by the way, when that happens, you'll see the real wages grow up. So these are great questions you're asking, Kayleigh. This is but we've got to cut through this. We've got to get good data. And we're not getting that.
I want to ask you about the downward revisions, if we stick with the BLS story for a moment, because the president's Truth Social post said that the BLS revised the jobs total down by over 800,000, quote, right after the election, unquote. This gets to the political motivation that he's suggesting. But BLS revised those numbers on August 21st of 2024. We were in Chicago at the Democratic Convention. that week. So what's he talking about?
I think
with the timeline?
what the president is legitimately concerned about is a pattern going back to Obama 2015 all the way through the Biden years and his term, where the BLS and BEA appeared to be playing politics at times. They gave you 3 examples. And I think there's an issue of trust here. Do you trust the numbers? I don't trust the numbers. I haven't trusted them for a long time. So what's wrong with firing the person who's in charge of the production of the numbers when they've been getting it wrong month after month after month? And then, I mean, it's like,
so in January
it's like capitulation here, the biggest miss in 50 years.
Well, January 2024, Biden is president, seeking re-election at this point. We got a downward revision of 234,000. You wouldn't have believed that figure either then.
We don't. Do you trust them, Kaylee? Do you trust the BLS at this point?
That's not a question for me, sir. I'm not being interviewed here.
Correct. So I think your investors don't trust it. I don't trust it. Nobody trusts it out there. And what are we talking about here? I think what we're talking about is getting integrity. What I told you earlier, Kaylee, is a lot of the problem came from 2 things: how illegal immigration distorts the numbers, and how the pandemic programs basically led to massive distortions. And for some reason, we haven't been able to get back to the accuracy we had prior to that. But even before the pandemic, there were documented cases. The quick pay thing I mentioned with Obama, the Q4 incident in 2018, where those were clearly political manipulation of the data. So we got to get away from that. And we need better numbers so that the Fed can make better decisions, because they're making horrible decisions right now.
We don't have evidence to support those instances here at Bloomberg, Peter,
which
but
one?
I'm glad.
The quick pay?
That
one's pretty well documented. I mean, I would just ask you to go back and look at what happened there. And then in
to the extent that you have evidence here, come back and talk to us about it. To the extent that you have evidence of this being rigged, we want to hear about it.
I would just put it on the table.
Well, I appreciate your coming in to talk to us, as always, Peter. Peter Navarro is, of course, White House Senior Counselor for Trade and Manufacturing Policy. Thank you, as always, for coming over from the White House to talk to us on Bloomberg. The flurry of news from Washington today was enough for us to see a drop in equity markets, beginning with data this morning that we've been talking about, and a massive drop in Treasury yields. We turn now to power moves with Bloomberg's Michael Regan, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York to talk about how markets reacted to the trade revisions that the world received overnight. We'll start with tariffs. Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, Joe, I mean, obviously, the reaction started overnight and really started in the overseas markets, European markets. You look at like the French index and the pan-European index hit even worse than the U.S. index today. And I think, these drops today were so dramatic, especially in the U.S. There you see, almost 2% in the S&P 500. The NASDAQ, worst drop since April for the NASDAQ 100. I think, these moves were so pronounced because there had been so much strong momentum in this rebound from the April lows. S&P 500 up 28% from its lows just in April, 3 straight months of gain. So at that point, that sort of momentum in the market can become its own catalyst and really exaggerate the rebound, perhaps further than it deserves to go. And when you suddenly get hit with some negative news, starting first with that Amazon disappointing outlook last night, then we got the tariffs news, and then to wake up and see the job numbers this morning, really just a lot to throw at the market on a Friday in August, when the type of month where we're susceptible to sort of more volatility than normal. A lot of people on vacation, that sort of thing. So you can see that Amazon plunge really more than 8%. That's a heavy weight alone on the index. The market did try to make a little bit of a recovery during the day. You saw those lower yields there, that just major crash in the 2-year yield. I think there was some traders thinking these lower rates will boost risk appetites a little bit, boost the stock market. But then by the afternoon, we just got hit with more and more sort of shocking news. President Trump's post on his social media platform saying he was dispatching the nuclear submarines to be in position in appropriate places in response to some aggressive tweets from the former president of Russia. And then to Mr. Navarro's point, whether you are in his camp and believe that the numbers have been manipulated, or on you're the other side of the aisle and you worry that President Trump is looking to put in one of his supporters to sort of manipulate the numbers. Either case may not be true, but it's a lot to digest on a Friday afternoon. So I don't think that helped things to all of a sudden introduce this new sort of black swan type of episode where we're worried about the integrity of the labor statistics. So really a lot for the market to digest on a Friday afternoon.
Yeah, it's a lot for us, too. This isn't the Friday I think many of us expected. Bloomberg's Michael Regan, thank you so much. Yeah. Now, of course, we started this Friday morning with a special guest on Bloomberg, the U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, on the deadline today of tariffs being implemented August 1st, although they won't actually start being collected until the 7th. And he shared with us that while the trade deals are in, the administration isn't exactly done with finalizing everything yet. This is what he said.
We'll be finishing the paperwork in the next weeks and maybe a couple of months, but these deals are pretty much set. They are set, right? We wouldn't make an agreement unless we all knew the contours of it, and the countries knew it. And it's an exciting time because the president has essentially reset the global trading system, and so we'll be finalizing everything that's been agreed to on paper and then monitoring compliance going forward.
For more insights into this on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio, we turn to Andrew Hale, Senior Policy Analyst for Trade Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Andrew, welcome back. It's great to have you. Mr. Greer says this is an exciting time. Are you excited?
Well, we've had another pause for 7 days for the 70 countries that do not have any sort of tariff deal framework with the U.S. And so that it does provide another week for some countries will be scrambling forward to get a deal. It's also a small window of time that permits Customs and Border Protection to prepare for this massive undertaking of collecting the highest tariffs the United States has imposed in over 100 years. So, I mean, like I said, Jamieson Greer did actually say that they're going to have to produce some paperwork. And we've seen so little paperwork. And of course, this provides more time to sort of finalize some of the announcements that have already been made with various countries. But I'd have to say we're far away from the 90 deals in 90 days that we were originally promised.
Well, so when we consider that there's still the next 90 days and the 90 after that we might have questions about, Andrew, as Mexico has been able to get a 90-day extension. Even countries that thought they might be facing these higher tariff rates today now know they have until August 7th to maybe try to squeak out a deal or extension of their own. We were just hearing from a trade advisor to the president, Peter Navarro, that there is no uncertainty when it comes to tariffs. How would you describe the degree of uncertainty there still remains with this policy right now?
I would have to strongly disagree with that, because when I speak to CEOs of companies or even just small business owners, or they make business plans in this environment. When I talk to bankers, they can't make investment plans. Even individuals, even myself, I've been holding back personally from making certain purchasing decisions in this environment. So I would have to agree with this, because everyone I speak to is asking, when they ask for advice, they say, where is this all going to land? And we still don't know entirely where it's going to land. We have certainly a clear idea that we did in April. They certainly have been doing some negotiations. But of course, and I think there's a good point to be making, that these rates that they just announced in the past, last night, these rates are much lower than the April the 2nd Liberation Day rates that send the markets into a tailspin. But they're still high in many countries. And the irony, of course, is that the courts are now challenging this. It has been challenged in the courts. I mean, Trump issued this new tariff schedule at the same time the courts are preparing to appeal them, which is interesting.
Interesting to hear the arguments before the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals here in Washington, D.C., yes, considering this entire construct. Judge Reyna, an Obama appointee, said yesterday, one of the big concerns I have is that IEPA, this is, of course, the emergency law that the president is basing all of this on, doesn't even mention the word tariffs anywhere.
No.
Will the court be the undoing of this whole construct?
I think after yesterday, where the 11 judges meeting on bank in a mass on-bank panel, which is quite unusual, they were really pushing back. The 11 judges appear to be mostly skeptical of the administration's arguments for using emergency legislation to implement tariffs. The courts are catching up with the administration. These tariffs could just evaporate if the courts decide that. And then Customs and Border Protection will have the laborious task of having to pay back the tariffs to those Americans that have been paying them. Remember, these tariffs have been paid by American importers, small businesses, manufacturers, etc. Mm-hmm. If I could just use the example of Canada, we're not importing finished goods from Canada. We're importing intermediate goods, particularly in the auto sector. And often those goods crisscross the U.S.-Canadian border 5 times on average in the manufacturing process. Are we seriously going to tariff them every time they cross the border?
Andrew, we spent less time talking about this aspect of the president's various orders he signed yesterday when it comes to tariffs, but there also is included a 40% tariff rate on transshipped goods, something that I assume is aimed primarily at China. It lacked a certain degree of detail, though, and I wonder your thoughts on how exactly those rules would be made, how they realistically could be enforced.
Well, again, that creates another task for Customs and Border Protection, another headache for them. They're going to have to build more infrastructure, staff up to assess those sorts of things and create processes. But I think it's actually a good idea. I would actually agree with the transshipment of companies basically trying to ship things through, for example, Vietnam. And that was very much part of the Vietnam agreement that was announced with regards to a 40% tariff there. That was already announced in that specific agreement with Vietnam. So again, they're very aware of that. I'm very aware of the fact that China tries to use third-party countries to ship things into the United States. So I would actually, that's a positive aspect of this process to address that concern.
You know, a lot of our viewers and listeners, Andrew, know you as the man who coined the term pebble economy. I hope you're happy that the Penguins got off the hook here. Apparently, in this most recent version, the McDonald's Islands are in the clear.
The McDonald Islands, the herd of McDonald Islands, which is a dependency of Australia, are in the clear. There's been no human visitation to the island in I think 11 years or 10 years. So I think they're off the hook for now. We don't even have contact with them.
And now it's a Friday show
that
we can head into the weekend now that the Penguins have been mentioned. Finally, Andrew, obviously we're now looking at August 7th, but we're also looking at August 12th, where no trade extension of the détente between the U.S. and China has yet been signed off on by President Trump. Do you anticipate that if we get to that date without that sign-off, that the tariff levels will automatically rebound to the sky-high rates at which we saw earlier this year?
Well, what they've announced a new tariff schedule just last night, and I've been looking at them, and they are high, but they're not as high as the April tariffs, but they certainly will have an impact. But also, I think they're running against the courts as well, because we had oral arguments yesterday at the U.S. Court of Appeal for the Federal Circuit, and we could get that decision as early as potentially 3 weeks. So I think they're very much aware that their opportunity to use these tariffs, the emergency legislation to impose these tariffs, is disappearing, and it could just evaporate. So they have to get these deals done as soon as possible before that happens.
All right, Andrew Hale, Senior Policy Analyst for Trade Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for joining us. And from tariffs to all of the other developments from the White House that we're following tonight, the resignation of the Fed Governor Adriana Kugler, as well the planned firing of Bureau of Labor Statistics Commissioner Erica McEntefar, and the weaker than expected jobs report, all unfolding after the president announced these tariff revisions just hours before his August 1st deadline. Most countries, of course, facing a baseline 10% tariff rate, but Trump slapping 35% on Canadian goods not covered under the USMCA. The new tariffs will take effect August 7th to give U.S. Customs and Border Protection time to prepare. Meantime, as we were just suggesting, Joe, discussions continue with China as well as with Mexico.
Yeah, the tariff news played out today alongside the July payrolls report, which saw the U.S. notching the worst 3 months for job growth, as we discussed earlier this hour, since the pandemic. That data adding to evidence of a softening labor market. President Trump reacted with a vow to fire the BLS commissioner, Erica McEntefar, announcing that the move in a social post saying, quote, numbers like this must be fair and accurate. They can't be manipulated for political purposes. He did not offer any evidence. Joining us now, the latest on the moves coming from the White House, Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson. As an editor in our newsroom, you must be running wild today.
What a couple of hours.
We've had some really interesting conversations before you joined us here with Peter Navarro, with Senator Mark Warner. What's going to be the fallout from this firing, for starters?
Well, I think it calls into question all future jobs numbers, right? Because now what Trump has basically said, is if I don't like the job numbers, they must have been manipulated. Mm-hmm. The jobs numbers were not what he expected, and making it worse from his perspective was that they downwardly revised the numbers from earlier this year, showing that the jobs market was really slowing down. What he could have done was said, hey, Jerome Powell, the labor market is slowing down. How's about you lower some rates? But he didn't. He said that the numbers were made up, and we have confirmed he has now fired Erica McIntyre. She's gone. Yeah. She is a Biden appointee, but, we've all been in Washington a while. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is not the sexiest agency in town full of people who take risks. She's a statistician and a respected one, and she's out of a job for telling him things he didn't want to hear.
Yeah, well, to your point on him also possibly being able to take the avenue of just telling the Fed to lower rates. He, of course, has placed a lot of blame on Chairman Powell for not doing so, suggesting that the next Fed chair he wants to make sure they have a low interest rate bias. And while he may not be able to replace the chair in the immediate future, he is going to get the opportunity potentially, Wendy, to nominate a new governor. Should we anticipate that he's probably going to try to target someone with a low rate bias for that position?
Absolutely. This sets him up beautifully. He seems to be in a bit of a bad mood this afternoon. And if anything, this should cheer him up. Adriana Kugler moves out of the way. He can now put in one of the people who we consider on the short list for the next Fed chairman to replace Powell when Powell's term is up next May. He can put that person in now. That person can agitate for lower rates. And then in May 26, when Powell's term is up, he can just have them switch jobs. And, Bob's your uncle.
There's going to be more here, I'm sure, and we'll talk about it with Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson. Wendy, thank you so much for joining us on Balance of Power. To some breaking news we just got from the terminal. The Supreme Court signaling it will consider outlawing the use of race in drawing voting maps. This just took place here, the move setting up a blockbuster showdown with implications for dozens of congressional districts with predominantly minority populations. The court's decision would expand a Louisiana case already on the docket. Justices saying they will consider arguments that the 1965 Voting Rights Act no longer provides a legitimate basis for map drawers to intentionally create majority black or majority Hispanic districts. Now, while President Trump called for the firing of the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics today, something we've been talking about through the hour, he also posted on his social media platform about a move that he is making abroad. President Trump said the U.S. is moving 2 nuclear submarines to respond to what he called highly provocative statements from former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev. He commented on that move, speaking to reporters before departing the White House a short time ago.
Well, we had to do that. We just have to be careful. And a threat was made, and we didn't think it was appropriate, so I have to be very careful. So I do that on the basis of safety for our people.
Joining us now with more on Balance of Power is Rebecca Grant, Vice President of Defense Programs at the Lexington Institute. It's great to have you with us, Doctor. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. Your thoughts on this decision, these 2 submarines, and where they might be now. Obviously, we don't know where they are in the world, but for the president to go out of his way to make this point tells you what?
It's very unusual. And this tells me that Trump is telling Putin and Medvedev that 2 can play at this nuclear chess game. Remember, Medvedev and Putin, of course, have made so many nuclear threats in and around the Ukraine conflict. But this is a very definite move. He's talking, we think, about the nuclear-powered and nuclear-armed submarines. Now, he wasn't clear, but let's assume it is the boomers, the Ohio class, that carry the nuclear weapons. He is saying to Russia, hey, I'm going to put them in their launch boxes. Their nuclear missiles have about a 7,000-mile range. We're told, of course, it's all classified. And so this is reminding Russia that the U.S. nuclear deterrent, with the submarines as the backup second strike, is alive and well, and you better not try anything.
Well, so when we consider how we expect Russia to respond, knowing that this is in response not to the current Russian president, Rebecca, but the former one, how do you think Vladimir Putin would react to something like this when it wasn't necessarily him that was making an escalatory threat in the first place?
Well, indeed, but Medvedev, remember, is sort of, in a way, kind of his lapdog, and took over as president for him at one point in time, and they're very close, and he's sort of a mouthpiece for that whole establishment. You know, he wouldn't be saying this without Putin letting him do it at a minimum. So, of course, with U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff due to travel to Moscow, I think that's also an important element here. Trump is signaling that he is out of patience, that he doesn't want any more of this nuclear posturing that has so tied the hands of the previous administration and of NATO, and that Putin continues to use. And so I think it's very much aimed at getting Putin's attention as well, and saying, you know, we are not going to permit this. Nuclear deterrence still holds. Now let's talk Ukraine ceasefire.
Interesting to hear the words of Mr. Medvedev here, referring to the dead hand, the system that automatically launches a retaliatory strike by way of Russia. What do you suspect Vladimir Putin's response will be here?
Well, again, it's very specific nuclear language, and I think that's why Trump played his card, which is that secure submarine second strike force with the Ohio class. And, you know, I'm hoping Putin's reaction here is, OK, we got to stop going down this road. Remember, Medvedev is also the one who talked wildly about giving Iran nuclear weapons after Operation Midnight Hammer. So he's a bit of a loose cannon.
When we consider, Rebecca, that this is coming at the same time that President Trump is suggesting that as soon as next week, secondary sanctions will be going into place for buyers of Russian energy if Russia does not agree to a ceasefire with Ukraine, how does that then how does this development today factor in to that, and whether or not Vladimir Putin's decision-making around the war in Ukraine is going to be altered?
Well, clearly designed to just put that much more pressure on Putin. And when we haven't seen an American president make a nuclear threat like this very often. One thinks about Eisenhower and how he used threats of nuclear weapons to end the Korean War, 60 years ago. So this is Trump doing everything but, and including the kitchen sink of showing all of U.S. military might, the economic threats as well, to try to get Putin to move to a more rational stance. And I think Witkoff will bring, again, some form of economic incentive. And the idea is that maybe all of this together, close off the nuclear route, try to put pressure on China and others, and that might make Putin decide to attempt a ceasefire, or at least to negotiate in good faith, which he has not done so far.
Dmitry Medvedev also wrote on social media, Trump's playing the ultimate game with Russia. 50 days or 10, he should remember two things. One, Russia isn't Israel or even Iran. What does he mean by that?
He means that Russia's a harder target set. You can't threaten us like this. I don't know what he means. But, remember, Medvedev and Putin as well, they echo Lenin, who always said you probe with the bayonet, and if you hit steel, you step back. If you hit mush, you go forward. And we've forgotten that in our relations with Russia, it's a multi-step game, and the U.S. has to be canny and show strength and containment power at every step. And frankly, that's why we have this elaborate nuclear deterrent. The submarines are part of that. Another possibility, too, all our submarines are nuclear powered. So Trump might also have been referring to those 4 special Ohio-class submarines that are converted to carry 150 Tomahawk land attack missiles. They use those against Iran. And of course, there's been a rumor about possible Tomahawks going into Ukrainian hands. So I think there's that possible threat as well. Anyway, add it all up, and it is military pressure really trying to tell Putin to knock it off.
Well, and what military pressure can Vladimir Putin respond with if necessary? As we consider, we were just talking about sanctions. That's obviously the financing of the war machine. What is the status of the war machine right now, Rebecca?
Well, it is running full steam, and they are producing 1,500 tanks a year. They are on track to replace all the equipment that they've lost in Ukraine, which is a lot. NATO's new Supreme Allied Commander, Alexis Grinkovich, has said that the U.S. has to prepare for a 2-pronged war, a possible simultaneous Taiwan and Russian strike somewhere in Europe. And so this is also, I think, Trump, seeing those intelligence estimates and trying to shut this down right away by restoring what worked in the Cold War, which was very clear, unambiguous U.S. nuclear deterrence. It's incredible that it's come to that, but this is the right moment to use that U.S. nuclear deterrent card and really show that strongly. Putin doesn't have a lot of choice with his own nukes. He can't use battlefield nukes in Ukraine because the prevailing weather blows that back into Russia, and of course China would object strongly. So this again is Trump trying to shut down Putin's nuclear avenue.
All right, Rebecca Grant, thank you so much for joining us, Vice President of Defense Programs at the Lexington Institute. We appreciate it. And now let's turn to some other stories that we're following in today's Power Brief. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee visited Gaza for the first time today as part of the Trump administration's push to provide aid to starving Gazans and get a firsthand view of aid distribution. Both men were seen in front of signs that read, quote, 100 million meals delivered. Still, critics say that is not enough for the hunger crisis gripping the territory. Ceasefire talks with Hamas have yet to restart following the U.S. and Israel's decision to withdraw 2 weeks ago.
British socialite and former girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, has been moved to a minimum security prison in Texas from a low security facility in Tallahassee, Florida, where she is currently serving a 20-year jail sentence for procuring underage girls. Her relocation occurred this week and comes a week after she was interviewed by Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. At the Texas prison, Maxwell will sleep in dormitory housing and have access to off-site work programs. The House Oversight Committee is also seeking Maxwell's testimony about the Epstein case. The chairman of the committee says Maxwell's testimony will now be delayed.
And the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is shutting down. The CPB, which distributes funding to NPR and PBS, announcing it will begin a, quote, orderly wind down of its operations after President Donald Trump signed a package of spending rescissions that ended its federal funding. Last month, Congress approved cutting $9 billion for foreign aid and public media. In a statement, the corporation's president and CEO said, quote, despite the extraordinary efforts of millions of Americans who called, wrote, and petitioned Congress to preserve federal funding for CPB, we now face the difficult reality of closing our operations. A small transition team is expected to remain on hand through January.
Joining us now with reaction to this story and more of this evening's political panel, Brittany Martinez, Executive Director of Principles First, our Republican strategist alongside Democratic analyst and Bloomberg politics contributor Jeannie Shanzano, political science professor at Iona University. It's great to have both of you with us here. Jeannie, your thoughts on this, because I believe you might have seen this coming.
Yeah, I think when the rescission package came up, this was the biggest fear that many of us had. And I think it's really a devastating blow. You know, after Lisa Murkowski voted against it for this reason, Alaska had an unfortunate weather event, and she said on the floor that it was the public broadcasting that alerted so many of her constituents to safety. And this is happening after the flooding in Texas and so many of the extreme weather events just in New York the other day. We need some form of public broadcasting, particularly in rural areas, and to see it be devastated like this it's a sad day for me. Of course, I have friends who have worked there and still do, but I think it's more importantly a loss for the American public.
Well, and what backlash, Brittany, should Republicans brace for who voted for this?
I think that, to Jeannie's point, they're going to face backlash, especially from our rural communities. I don't mean to be hyperbolic when I say this, but this is going to make it harder to live and work and be an American. A lot of people depend on these sort of public broadcasting. I think it's really easy for us in the age of streaming in 2025 to forget that, but it's true, and I think they'll be hearing from their constituents.
Yeah, I think we need to delineate sometimes as well when we talk about these public stations. We're talking about local newsrooms that are in many cases funded with this money, as opposed to Morning Edition or All Things Considered, the national network programs that I think a lot of people associate with NPR. So if you're Mike Rounds and you thought you had a deal with President Trump to prevent the closure of these stations, what do you do now?
I think that you let your constituents know that maybe this isn't exactly what I thought we were doing in this deal.
You just go right to the voter.
Yeah, I think you have to go right to the voter. And listen, we live in a day and age where it's not a good thing to apologize in politics, apparently, when I think in reality it shows a lot of maturity and an ability to take accountability. So I think you go to your constituents and say, we're going to fix this and we're going to make it easier for you to get your news.
Well, of course, right now, August is the time when a lot of these elected officials are getting face time with their constituents, many of them doing so in town hall forums. And many Republicans are seeing pushback regarding tariffs back home in their districts. We saw this as much last night during a raucous town hall in Wisconsin in Congressman Brian Steil's district. Take a listen.
Tell me the dire circumstances that triggered his tariff wars. Thank you.
Very good.
Tom, you got a veteran's hat, so out of the gates, I just want to say thank you for your service to our country. As we look at the broader tariff back and forth that's going on with the administration, this really, at its core, needs to be an opportunity to make sure that other countries are treating the United States fairly. The United States.
It's a lot of booze, Jeannie. Do you envy these lawmakers who have to face down these questions?
I do not. And I give so much credit to that constituent to stand up and ask that, because this is the question that so many of us have been asking for so long, which is what is the emergency that prompted not targeted tariffs against, say, China, but tariffs against our closest allies around the world?
Considering the justification is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. That's the legal grounds he's standing on.
Absolutely, and is a trade deficit that we've had for 50 plus years really an emergency. And I think this is exactly what's going to happen more and more as prices go up. As we were talking about earlier this week, when you see Procter & Gamble say the Charmin, Tide, all of the back to school things, they're all going to go up in the near future. This is what constituents are going to say. Why did we do all this? And the White House is now, by my count, 6 responses to that are not going to be something that people like poor Brian Steil can defend as much as he's trying.
Well, it's interesting. You see that voter deserves a lot of credit. You could also argue that Brian Steil deserves a lot of credit for even holding a town hall. How many members are doing this as opposed to teletown halls or none at all on the Republican side?
I would guess probably not many. I think that we've also seen some advice from leadership in the past that says don't do a town hall right now. Yeah. And I think a lot of Republicans tend to focus more on teletown halls. So I don't see that happening, especially when we see that that's the result that he got and that's the experience he received. I don't think that they're going to be jumping for joy to do these town halls.
But if you can't even do a town hall, how are you supposed to campaign for re-election? Yeah. The midterms are next year. Brittany. And does this not spell a massive problem for the majority?
And it's August 1st. It is August 1st. So you have all of a recess to have these issues come up, not to mention everything happening with the Epstein files, right? So they didn't want to deal with it in Congress right now, so they sent all the members home, except now they have to deal with it at home, and the American people are upset. So yes, I think that they should be putting themselves out there. That is what they were elected to do, is to support the American people. And it's tough, and I don't envy him in this moment, but it's your duty. It's your duty to explain why it is you're doing what you're doing.
Big breaking story that we started the program with today, the president's decision to fire the person who runs the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Here's what he said a short time ago.
I think her numbers were wrong, just like I thought her numbers were wrong before the election. Days before the election, she came out with these beautiful numbers for Kamala, I guess Biden/Kamala, and she came out with these beautiful numbers trying to get somebody else elected. Then right after the election, I think on the 15th, November 15th, she had an $800,000 or $900,000 massive reduction. Said she made a mistake. That woman's numbers are.
We talked about this earlier with Peter Navarro, and just to correct the record, those downward revisions were actually in August. We were in Chicago at the convention when that took place, Jeannie, even before the election. With that said, what's going on here?
What's going on is what always happens with Trump. Blame Joe Biden, blame Jerome Powell, now blame this, commissioner of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. She probably didn't have this on her bingo card, that doing her job in terms of this really important task of unemployment statistics would result in a charge that she had politicized the numbers. But this is going to go on and on with Donald Trump because he doesn't want to own the reality that the economy that is floundering at this point is floundering because he inherited a fairly robust economy and he decided to use this tariff regime around the world. And it's created so much uncertainty that he's seeing that at this point and he's casting blame elsewhere because he doesn't want to look at himself.
Well, so do you expect that there will be any Republican pushback to this? There's plenty Democratic lawmakers who are out calling this dictatorship type behavior, making comparisons to the Soviet Union or even North Korea. Brittany, do you expect some Republicans may even take issue with this?
I think maybe our usual suspects, so Senator Murkowski, Collins, those sorts of folks. I do think, though, that Americans should be concerned about this, right? He doesn't want to take accountability for anything, and it isn't the commissioner's job. It's her job to talk about this report, but it's not her job to create the jobs. That is the job of the president and trying to fix the economy. And to the point earlier, we are in such a volatile place. Like, of course, we're not in a good place economically. And rather than get economists who are going to push back and tell you when it is the right thing or wrong thing to do, he surrounds himself with people who are his sycophants and supporters. And so I think that I hope to see some pushback from Republicans, but I don't see much of that happening.
You wonder if Democrats will try to force an investigation into this at some point. Jeannie, in our final moment, we asked Senator Warner about that. Is this where it's going?
It is. They don't have much power to do that unless they get a bipartisan support, some bipartisan support. So I don't think it'll go anyplace. But I do think there's going to be a breaking point, maybe not now, but with Republicans who say enough is enough. Everybody in D.C. cannot be fired because they are producing numbers that the president doesn't like.
Of course, the president right now is now en route to Bedminster, New Jersey for the weekend. Do we think we're done with the Friday news done? Have we had enough?
I'm not going.
Never done, never.
I'm staying late for that reason tonight.
All right. Well, we wish you luck, Joe. And we thank you, Brittany Martinez and Jeannie Shamzano, our political panel, this evening for joining us on what was a pretty incredible way to end the week in terms of news from here in Washington. Also, a programming note, make sure to tune into a brand new episode of Wall Street Week that airs tonight right after this on Bloomberg TV and radio. You'll find a conversation with former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers discussing the impact of this week's Fed decision and those dissenting votes.
Looking forward to it. Thank you for joining us on Balance of Power. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday. This is Bloomberg TV and radio.